there's Albertson Ditch, there's the dam. It's not exactly the scale, but that's definitely the idea. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brockway. Okay, so we're about an hour into this. I want to do a reality check here. So I want to give the commissioners a chance to ask some questions. I want to give Alan Mary a chance to ask some questions. I want to have some time for public comment. A lot of you have commented with written comments. We've read the comments. I can't say I've read every one because some have continued to come in even in the last couple of days, okay? And some of them are quite long as well. Who thinks they want to comment today in oral testimony? Just as kind of a show of hands, so I have some idea what I'm trying to manage here, okay? I'm seeing about a dozen hands maybe, and there will be more, there always are. Commissioners, this is scheduled to end at 3:30. If we ran a little long, do either of you have appointments, or do people have appointments that, are really hard out at 3:30? Okay, so we have a little bit of flexibility, and with that, let me turn to the board for questions. Does anybody want to go first?
Yeah, I'm good.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I've noted the questions and what part of the documentation questions refer to. So some of this has already been answered, but I'm going to handle them anyway because these came in late. So the diversion Albertson ditch will be enlarged so the stream will flow through it without the need for a cofferdam. The cofferdam will be needed to completely divert the stream. So my question was, how will the fish be handled? And initially, they were going to be channeled into that pond down at the end below the dam, and now suggested that maybe a channel be cut and put into that area right below the dam. And so I'm concerned about the ability to have the fish be able to come back upstream. And you answered the diversion question. I read your response, Chuck, to the how to monitor the water management plan that needs to be not only implemented the way that you showed it, but then also managed as we go along. So you answered that question. The fish passage ladder allows the fish to move up and downstream of the diversion dam. Who is certified that the fish will be able to come back upstream? So the proposed pool and drop channel, as I saw it in your drawings, drop 6 feet to the pool downstream of the dam, and so I'm concerned about how they'll travel back up. There are 10 drops in a 15-foot increments, so I'm concerned about that. Then there were questions that were brought up about removing the sediment. That's part of the, the purpose of the application is to remove legacy sediment from about 1,100 feet of channel. So we've arrived at that this is the best way to remove the sediment, an average depth of about 4 feet. It's on Exhibit A8. How does that affect the fishing at that particular site?
Do we want to do one question at a time, or?
Let's look at that. If he's on the subject of the fish,
Okay, and then
I'll
finish.
just letting it go
Okay.
because it's sort of a similar topic of
Great.
fishing.
Okay.
No, that's, yeah.
You want stop there.
If you want to answer that, sure, let's,
Okay, so,
because I've got a few, quite a few
the
questions.
questions, it might be, I don't know which is more expedient in this case. Typically, we'll take one question at a time. So, if you want to address, I'm not sure. I'd like to also to say that Doug McGargle has come in from Fish and Game, and I had said at the beginning that he was likely going to be here, so thanks for being here. And anybody want to tackle this one? Go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Here it is again. The groundwater pipe, called groundwater pipe. The well is about here. So there's an ability to inject cold water into this deep area. And I probably wasn't very clear, but this pipe that could be put across this embankment would not be to convey fish across there. It would be to move cold water, fresh water down into this area of the stream, which would be dewatered by the copper dam. So if it looks like fish are getting stressed and they actually need to be removed, then we have a crowd unlimited volunteering to actually do the fish rescue.
I must have misunderstood.
I'm sure it wasn't clear on that. And then as far as the upstream fish movement, design of fish passage structures is both a science and an art, but there are quite a few criteria, hydraulic criteria that there's pretty well a consensus on. 12 inches is kind of the maximum that you want to see per drop, per lift for trout. The velocity in the pool needs to be somewhere around ½ foot per second. These are, again, all plus or minus. And then you need to have down at the bottom attraction velocities so that the fish know where to go. You know? So the way we've designed this is, let's come back to this. And this will be kind of a field fit thing. You won't see it on the engineering drawings, but we'll put large angular stone here at each of these drops, so that we kind of get these jets of water going through the passages between the rocks. And you want attraction velocities of like 5 to 8 feet per second, so the fish can sense that, hey, this is upstream, this is where I want to go. Now there was a concern that Idaho Fish and Game raised as to how are you going to prevent the fish from sensing the velocity coming out the underflow pipes and just going up those, which I think that's a good point. So we're going to want to put basically baffle something into those pipes to kind of diffuse the velocity and then be a physical barrier so the fish can't go up there.
While you're on this structure, how does this structure compare to upstream fish passage today?
Well, today there isn't any. So 0 versus something.
I think the question was whether it was designed for the targeted species, and what you're telling me is that it is targeted for the trout.
Rainbow trout.
And that design, is that need to be, or is it ever certified by somebody?
Well, we asked Idaho Fish and Game to, they were gracious enough on their own time, have their engineer take a look at this relative to hydraulics and fish passage criteria. And I'm sure Doug can speak to that if he wishes, but I think that the assessment of that was generally positive, that this is going to be a well-designed fish passage structure. Now, again, because we're not building the Bonneville Dam fish ladder, right? It's all going to be made out of stone and stuff, so everything's kind of plus or minus. But we can place these rocks exactly where we need to be to get the traction velocities and the pool velocities that we need.
You want to keep going?
So, construction of the wetlands, looked at the exhibit A5, and it appears that approximately 25 or 30% of open water will become wetlands now. So, how will this affect the ability for anglers to enjoy these waters? That is, we're talking about public access, and public access to me means a couple of things. One is, can you get to where you want to fish? And also, what was the availability of fishing before, and is that present after the project? And obviously, we're reducing that. So, my question would be, what are the open waters right now in terms of acreage? Because you're giving us acreage of constructed wetlands, but what was it before? What was the open water before, and what is it now? So are we going from, 5 acres to 2.5 acres, or to 1 acre?
Well, the area from Kilpatrick Bridge downstream right now is about 7.5 acres. And it's mostly open water, but there's some mud flats that appear in the waters. So we're gonna take that.
I'm sorry, did you want to see that?
Oh, no, you've got something to show that.
On yours? Here, I can show you.
Either one. That. Right. So we'll be, converting 2.5 acres of that to wetlands from open water.
So we'll go from 7 to 2.5.
7.5 to 5. Yeah, and, it's 7.5, but a lot of it is pretty stagnant. I think Nick can speak to that.
Right, I put mud flats down, so.
Lots of mud flats, so.
And I would just say to that, Jacob, or Commissioner, that in this photo, you can see the boards are out here. You can see all the exposed vegetation and sediment. When the boards are in and the water level's higher, those areas are 8 to 12 inches of water on top of that sediment. You can fish to them, but there's nobody floating through those areas. And so essentially, a lot of that is unfishable anyways. And so we're going to be really enhancing the areas that are fishable and creating some better fishing. Not to mention, I don't think that we've talked about the fishing downstream and how that will improve. And so you're talking about 26 miles of Silver Creek that will also improve as far as fishing goes from this project. So I think that's important to note.
And I did read that in some of the public comment that it would be interesting for people to be able to fish other areas. So I'm sensitive to that. So there was a, so there was a statement made that the flow velocity does not change on the average, yet in the research that I read, we were trying to create a 80-foot average channel show to move that particular size sediment downstream. So that's what you needed. So if you're not increasing the flow capacity, how is that going to then aid in the movement of the sediment?
This was actually an engineering lesson that I learned from this project, in that it's not the velocity that's moving the sediment, it's actually the sheer stress of the water. So when it's deeper and you have more area of water moving through, that's actually what's moving the sediment. And the fine sediment is such in Silver Creek that cross section is designed to move it. So it's not actually the velocity that's moving it. Engineering 101.
So it's, let's go back to this. The work with ID, F and G, paragraph 2, are we going to be bringing back that ditch to its, the geometry that existed before the project? So are you preparing to make that ditch the same as it was before the project?
The bypass
Right.
channel? Yes. Yes.
Not the bypass channel, but the Albert Fit, whatever, ditch. Okay. On Idaho Department of Fish and Game, paragraph 3, they said that there was insufficient data provided to adequately evaluate the thermal effects. And number 2, the bullet point number 2 says that an increase in wetland area will cause a localized increase in ambient temperature. So are we taking into consideration when you talk about aiding and lowering the temperature, that the creation of the wetlands themselves will also increase the temperature of the water?
Well, that sounds like actually 2 questions. So the first one, the data question, it is, we won't know until it's done how much the temperature will decrease. We have an educated guess. As far as the wetlands, there's some debatable information out there. I would say that wetlands, in some instances where there's actually a wetland interacting with groundwater water, can actually cool water as opposed to sitting and heating up. And the surface area that you're talking about, right now it's just water. So there's going to be vegetation, there's going to be some area that's exposed, but it's going to be dramatically less. So, did you want to add anything?
Yes.
This is Mike Lonzo with Geoengineers, so he's working for the Nature Conservancy.
Yes, right now on the northern portion of the pond that will be filled as a wetland, the water's coming through, and it's only a foot or 2 deep. And in the heat of the summer, our monitoring has shown that that water over the sediment is much warmer, and the stream is moving through and it's conveying that water downstream. And with the wetlands in place, we won't be getting that flow through. So that water may get a little bit warmer, but it's offline from the main channel. And then also, where we have our settling ponds from the dredging, we will be, we expect that we'll get some stream flow, some groundwater flow from Loving Creek as well. So we're getting some cold water input, and that'll come through those little side channels.
Thank you. Concerning your comment, this is Geoengineers, about the fill being placed with low-bearing pressure equipment. And the statement that was made is that we anticipate the construction contractor will place the fill from the northern bank with appropriate machinery. So my question is, we anticipate, I guess that tells me that we're unsure about what kind of equipment will be used, who the contractor is he experienced with this type of work, and with what specific equipment will you require, and I would say require him to use versus anticipating. So do we know who might be doing the work and what kind of equipment they'll use?
Can you share your name for the record too, please?
Yes, I'm Michael Lonzo from Geoengineers, and that language is pretty typical because this project will go out to bid to a number of contractors, and we, as engineers, don't like to dictate the methods and means a contractor will use. We just specify that this is how it's going to be at the end of the day. So we don't like to dictate the type of machinery. So we do anticipate they will use low load-bearing equipment, and there's a bunch of different techniques that they can use. So we don't like to hobble them with, thou shalt do this or that. So, and we're likely to have the geotechnical engineers on site. There is an unknown. It will be soft material, and there will be some trial and error there. But we've done this type of stuff before, so it's that's why we have that language in there.
Okay. And Chuck, the water at the head gate to the irrigation ditch, how would that be controlled? Right now, you've got the dam there, I guess it's just allowing the water to flow over the top and remove the boards. But will you be monitoring the flow of water through the ditch, and how will you do that?
You mean during construction?
Right.
Well, we won't be measuring flow, if that's what you.
No, I mean, you know, right now, you're kind of monitoring the flow by removing the boards to get it lower level, or,
Yeah.
so, is it just gonna be allowed to flow freely through the ditch? then?
Yeah, during construction, right. We'll put that coffer down. Our target is to lower the water level by about 2 to 2.5 feet at least below the operating level. So.
There's on page 3 of that study, bank treatments. You're going to use 6 to 8 foot inch round posts that I presume they're about 10 feet long, because they'll go 8 feet into the soil and 4 feet up above the water, and then they'll be cut below the water level when you're done. And there's a statement in there that says, ultimately, the wood posts will rot away. Do we have any idea, will they appear at any time during the year with the level of the water? Will they be above? Will they be cut down low enough? Is the silk fencing going to show? I'm just curious about the time frame for that.
Maybe.
And Mike's smart.
Mike Combs again from Geoengineers. Yeah, the fence is still, it's a preliminary design at this point, and we are, the materials for the wood we looked at, we looked at a variety of different species, and we're gonna look at availability for the species and depending on how long it rots. Our estimates at this point, it'll last, for the portion of the fence that is underwater, it'll last at least 50 years is what we're estimating, based on based on some of the wood experts that we've talked to, the timber companies. There will be a portion on the very top of the fence that will be exposed through the down draw if it determines that we lower it during the winter time. That'll be susceptible to rot as well. So that'll probably last 10 to 15 years. If it turns out that, and that's an estimate, if it turns out that we choose to cut that top foot and a half that's exposed during the winter, we may do so, and that'll be based on the vegetative growth in the bank. Dana mentioned earlier that along the fence that will have wetland sod, that's got deep root growth, and so the intent of this is for it to be temporary, so that in time, say 50 years out, this thing will just be the vertical banks that you see in these types of creek systems. So, that answer all of those questions?
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you. So, Exhibit A, Attachment 1, Objective 1 is to reduce the thermal loading. And the quote in there is, while not lethal on the project site, temperatures downstream during low flow could and has resulted in fish kills. So if it's not lethal, I'm sure you're trying to prevent something in the future, but why the worry, and what proof of fish kill and that thermal loading was the cause is there?
That fish kill, I think that it's referring to was in '92, so it's been a while. But like I said in the presentation, the stress temperature for fish is 68 degrees. They don't do well at lower temperatures than that. They don't reproduce well, they don't eat well, and so,
Higher.
I'm sorry. It's hot in here.
Yeah, we don't do well.
You're not responding well either in high temperature.
Yeah, so anyway, I don't do well in high temperatures either. But, so the idea is that we, lower the temperatures in order to make it so that they are able to reproduce well, the fishery is better, and we don't have those fish kills, we don't have closures because of the dissolved oxygen levels. We don't have to deal with those kinds of things. It's a preventative, proactive restoration project.
Can I give Commissioner Cleary a chance here?
I don't know, I still have a lot of questions. answered the majority of it, so
Okay, we can come back.
we can.
I think in light of where we are in the process and the number of public
Mhm.
present, I would prefer to share my questions at another time.
Okay,
and
that's fine, and we
move
will,
forward.
obviously, as I said, we'll have another hearing. I'd like to ask a couple of questions. You know, Dana, I'm pretty familiar with the dynamics and the concepts behind this project. Did a similar type of project on my own property. And I have to say that there are certain elements in the presentation that leave me with a few questions. So, the project materials, the application materials, don't have a lot to say about the hydrology, in my opinion. So, in light of a lot of the public comment, which expressed a lot of concern about velocity and stream depth and everything else like that, I was interested to see that there's not a lot about that. In the report from geoengineers on page page 12 and 13, existing conditions, hydraulic results, and you've got a table there of peak flow hydraulic results. And you know, you spoke earlier about how it's not water velocity that's moving sediment, it's shear stress. So there was one of the photographs you showed, you talked about channelization through the sediment, and then there was a picture, it was a double slide, and the lower picture there was a visual, and you saw a wide flat surface of water. And you said this is what it's going to look like. It's going to look just like it does today, because you're going to have this water layer on top of presumably sediment, and the channel goes through the sediment. So
Are you talking about this one?
it was maybe right before that one.
That? I guess I'm not sure what you're.
Yeah. So anyway,
Standing on the bridge.
there's some pictures.
There.
Yeah, there you go. Right. Yeah, that one. So you said but this is what it's going to look like.
This is looking downstream. So the area, this red is Purdy's property looking
Right.
downstream. And we are actually going to be dredging that, but there's not going to be any bank treatments.
Right. Okay. So that's what. Okay. So
So that,
in
you
other
won't
words,
see that.
so what I gather is, so there's a couple things. You know, there's also no elevations really in the diagrams, and some of the diagrams are hard to follow because they're not adequately labeled. So forgive me for that, but I'm trying to figure out where to start with this. What I'm getting at is there are places where you're going to be excavating gravel in the stream bed. So there are places, I think, where it shows going down 2 feet below grade of the current gravel layer. The surface elevation is going to stay the same because you're going to keep the same dam in place. So, are you proposing then that the thermal impacts of the project are because you're going to have a greater square footage or cross section of stream moving through the sediment that's deeper, rather than a very wide and shallow one? That's the main idea.
That's the main one, is reduction of that surface area. You've got more water in the water column. That deeper water tends to be colder. The other part of it is the bottom release, because that colder water sits at the bottom. We will now have the ability to release the
Right.
cold water.
All right, so you're talking about some spring water coming up through the gravel? Is that what you're talking about, bottom release?
No, I'm talking about
Oh,
the
the
dam.
dam,
So
okay,
it's
all
two
right.
things. It's the surface
Right,
area and the
okay.
dam.
So in some areas, like this one, for example, there's no bank treatment. So there is still that big wide area of shallow water on top, but you've created a channel through the sediments now, and the idea being that there's a fairly, a sizable, in fact, according to Dr. Brockway's diagram, bigger than current channel through the sediment that is also quite deep. And so it's just that more volume of the water is going to be moving through a deep channel. Is that
I would say
accurate?
that's correct. Is that accurate?
I can maybe help clarify that. There's a lot of factors going on in
Right.
analyzing thermal loading. Dana bottom strata obviously doesn't get a chance to heat up as much.
Right.
And then thirdly, you have a deeper channel, you have more mass of water in a given reach of stream at any one time. So the more mass of water you have, the more resistant it is to heating and cooling, the more stable it is. So all those things plus the other ancillary effects work together.
Okay, so there are a lot of factors, and it's hard for me to know how to put these together in really concise questions. In a situation like this, you're gonna have greater shear stress with that main channel of water moving through there. Isn't that likely to dislodge sediments in the wall of sediments that are now adjacent to that channel if there's no protection for that?
Yeah, I'll answer that. Again, this is Michael Holmza from Geoengineers. You're right, it would. And that's why we are dredging that whole southern third on the Nature Conservancy's portion. We're gonna dredge that and get that material out of there because we recognize that when we focus that creek into that narrower channel, it would have that tendency to pick it up. That's why we're dredging it out.
Okay, so now I'm more confused. So you're not saying, and I haven't seen any proposal that says that you're actually going to take all the sediment out of that area below the bridge. You're talking about creating a channel through the sediments.
Okay, so below the bridge?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, that's what you just.
No, I was talking about
Okay.
we're doing two different, on this portion downstream of the bridge, we are dredging, well, let me start, I'm talking about the upstream portion, we're going to.
This is below the bridge.
This is below the bridge.
Right.
Can you show me the plan view?
The whole thing?
Yeah. That's good enough. Let's see how shaky this thing is. So we're gonna dredge this portion in red right here. And so that material will end up in these wetlands and in the settling ponds under here. And so you're right that when we do that, the velocities will be a little bit greater and the shear stresses will be greater. And so we need to really vacate the fine sediment out of here. And so,
Right.
when,
And I'm just going to interrupt you while you're going. So my understanding was in this reach here, you've got both existing bank and you're going to have this curtain that's going to line that area of wetlands, right?
yes, sir.
Right.
Ultimately, it'll be the fence.
Yeah, it's a fence, a fabric fence with poles.
Yes,
and,
sir.
you know, you're still working on the ultimate design for that, but that's what you're gonna do. And then downstream of that, you don't have either. You don't have either a
No.
bank structure where you're dredging. You don't have either a bank, natural bank, or the fence.
That's right. And all we're proposing to do is to dredge a channel. And how we came upon this was one of those aha moments when if we dredge this down and all the way down to gravel, and then we would have this plug of sediment that, and then this will all be dredged or excavated down to the dam from here to the
Right.
town. And so in profile, working downstream, if you're looking at the Nature Conservancies, we've kind of cleared the bed of the river, then we'd have that big plug of sediment, and then we go back down. So we realized that we had to get rid of that plug of sediment. Also, during construction, as Dr. Brockway said, they're gonna lower this portion of the creek about 2.5 feet, I think he said. And so that during construction would encourage sediment moving through during construction. So we've got, and I forget the exact dimensions, it's like maybe 40 feet wide, that we're gonna create a corridor that we're going to dredge and put that material up into the Nature Conservancy portion.
Right, so again, coming back to my earlier question about shear stress, it's the wall of sediment on either side of that channel, that's what I'm asking about. Isn't that going to tend to move that sediment?
No,
It's
not in this portion. There's no risk of that at all. Because if you think about it, we're actually going to be decreasing the velocities there because we're increasing the cross-sectional area. But the main point is we want to get down to the gravel.
And maybe just to clarify, when the University of Idaho actually did their, they did a model of this.
Right.
The reach on our property actually has a higher gradient than this part,
Right.
so
I
the water
figured that.
naturally slows
Right.
down
Well,
in this
this is the downstream end where there's a dam. So all of a sudden you've raised the elevation 6 feet with your dam, or whatever the total elevation is of the dam. And so yes, it's steeper gradient, it's the natural gradient of Silver Creek, and all of a sudden you hit this flat portion where you've got this. And so yes, the velocities are slowing. You know, I'll be perfectly honest and say, having heard and read the public comments over a long period of time, I was expecting much narrower channels than you're proposing and deeper excavation. And then when I first saw this drawing and the lack of sinuosity in there, I thought, you know, this doesn't make sense to me. You know, you're lowering the bed elevation, you've got a pretty straight, deep, narrow channel, and you know, I don't quite, and you're not really using the, there's not a lot of sinuosity, and you're not really using the existing banks that you have, and so it really didn't make sense. It's only after I've heard the presentation that I have a different view of what you're trying to accomplish here, but it raises a number of other questions for me. One of my questions about my interest in the velocity, you know, it's your statements about that the velocity is not increasing dramatically that really surprised me. Now, you said down to 0.1 or 0.2 feet per second. That seems practically not moving.
We actually did some measurements down where Nick has done projects before where he's narrowed the creek, you know, to half of what it was or even more. And I was surprised to see that the velocity changes were.
Right, but we just approved the project below the pool below the dam to add an extra meander. So in light of that project, I was nervous, honestly, about what is being talked about here and the lack of sinuosity. I'm just being honest with you, and I need to share my views with you because I want to make sure that my concerns are all addressed. And so we added another meander because you had a long straight section, and we had testimony that there was down cutting in the bed and, you know, velocities that were undesirable, so we added an additional, and that was the picture that you showed there at the end of 2013
Right.
or
And
2012.
that was also, I would say, different. They took it from 250 feet down to 45 feet, or
Right.
ridiculously narrow, and it was actually down cutting. So
And that's not,
changing
those
the
are not the
gradient.
widths that you're talking about here, first of all, right?
Right.
You're talking about double that,
Right.
right? And then like the upstream portion, right, adjacent to the green, the wetland, that's actually gonna remain as big open pool. It's
Right.
not gonna be, even though from the aerial, it looks like, you know, very shallow because of the way the aerial photo takes, it's actually gonna remain. So when you come out of the last of the S-turns,
Right. It will remain open. It is pretty shallow there, though. And then actually, the nice thing about that is it will probably be a natural sediment deposition area where if we need to do some maintenance, we can go. But yeah, so that will remain open. But you can see, and you know, the sinuosity is meandering in the aerial photo from the 46. You know, it's
well, when I first looked at this, I saw much more opportunity for basically continuing the S-bend pattern, but you know, the way you explained the project in the presentation today, you know, kind of that doesn't necessarily need to be, I guess, because the channel is wider and the velocities are lower than I was expecting, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting
May I
it.
make a couple of comments?
Yeah, sure.
Again, Michael Holmes. When you compare it to the downstream project that went in this last summer, that's a different beast altogether because it's a free-flowing system and there's no dam downstream,
Right.
so completely different. And in terms of the sinuosity, we had to put our sideboards up somewhere in terms of just pure economics and just the logistics of building it. And so it's easier, and we're kind of taking our cue from Mother Nature out there already. We already have the southern third of the creek is the deepest portion of it. And so it's easiest to stay on that bank from a constructability standpoint and just pure economics as well.
Okay, so coming to economics then, and I'm sure there's people in the audience who are gonna have more questions on these topics along the line that I'm asking, and I'll leave it to them. One of the things that I read in the application that gives me concern is your construction schedule seems especially aggressive. I've seen these dredges work, and man, are they slow. And so you're talking about you know, a September to 1st of December, let's say, timeframe, something like that. And talking about moving 50 to 60 feet a day in a 90-foot wide channel. I'm just curious to hear, at least on the dredge, I know you're not maybe specifying on the heavy equipment and the track hoe and all that, but I wanted to hear what kind of a dredge you're looking to use.
Go ahead.
Well, I would say that we've been working with a dredging consultant contractor out of Boise, and he's helped us develop this plan, and he's familiar with this area. He's been out here for quite some time. And the sediment that we're dredging is really fine, and it's going to come out pretty quickly. It's going to come out of the slurry, and we've got, I've got his confidence, and he's been involved with this, and he's saying the dredging itself is probably just 6 weeks. So everything else, there are other complications with the building the fence and everything else, but the dredging itself won't take that long. And here's a photo of the dredge. This is Golden Enviro is the name of the contractor. This is a dredge. It's probably 25, 30 feet long. It's on the back of a 18-wheeler. And here's another one. And so they were just taking it off the truck this day that we were taking these photos. Here's another one. It's got a couple long pontoons. And this is kind of like a snowblower apparatus. And there's the boom right there. And that one actually kind of comes down and it just kind of rotates and it activates it, and agitates it, puts it into a pipe and sucks it out. And he's got another one that's got a head that kind of moves back and forth with the vacuum. And so this would have cables on it, and he'd move back and forth. And yeah, this would go pretty quickly.
Okay, I won't push on that. You know, there's a lot going on. You've got to move it, you got to drain it, and you got to move it again. So it just seemed aggressive to me. Is there the possibilities, again, coming back to economics, if, you know, you find that the fabric is not working for you, that you have the budget to maybe go to those coir pillows or, you know, that type of thing that was shown in that photograph?
And we actually, I think, had talked about putting some of those logs, the coir, coconut fiber logs around the bends and on the edges where there might be more erosion.
Right. I'll be honest with you, I'm really skeptical of fabric in this application, and those things seem like a lot more solid, so I want to know, as a backup plan.
I thought that was in there, but maybe that was something we talked about.
We've got it in places along the top of the fence, so it would mimic an overhanging bank, and then that would be, it would put vegetation in there, so that would grow, like you're saying as well. And then there's an island upstream. If you're facing on the bridge looking upstream, there's an island that Dana showed. And we've got a little corridor going through there. That would probably have the coir logs as well.
Okay. And then finally, and then I want to, I'll quit. You know, we're gonna, we have a policy of requiring security on the revegetation. And I may have missed it, but I'm gonna want, or I want our staff at least, to see a revegetation plan.
Yes.
And so, when is that forthcoming?
Well, we're actually working with the Natural Resource Conservation Service on their wetland preserve program. So we will have a company that we hired to do the vegetation, but we'll be working with the NRCS tightly to get that together. So
We're gonna need to see that also. I mean, I know I don't have to tell you about the importance of revegetation. That is one of, and even in, talking about a stream project, but revegetation is often is right up there as the most important components of these things, and we always like to know that our staff has seen that prior to our approval, at least some kind of preliminary plan.
And some of the things that I sent yesterday, one was the monitoring plan, which talks about the requirements of NRCS on the wetlands and the vegetation, their monitoring requirement. The other was the science report, but the monitoring report specifically talks about the vegetation part of it.
All right, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to stop with my questions and open it to public comment. Actually, I'm not going to open, I'm going to give, Alan, do you have any questions?
Thank you. I just had a couple.
Give us your name for the
Alan Merritt, Department of Water Resources. I guess I had a question for Chuck on the flood flows through the dam. Was those capacities additive?
No. So the capacity, I think, was.
I'm sorry. Let's, well, actually, you know what, since Alan is why don't you go ahead, yeah, it's not like a public comment thing, go ahead and answer, Alan, if you would, just so we can hear you though.
If we just say it a little louder.
Yeah.
The 640 CFS is the capacity of the dam with 2 feet of freeboard and all the checkboards full. The 100-year flood is 661 CFS. So they can pass that with maybe 1.5 foot. So, yeah,
I guess, point of clarification, I didn't know if they're additive or not.
no.
I guess the other question about the use of the well, I presume it's gonna be the non-irrigation season. You may need a water right.
That's a good point. You mean the temporary water right?
Yeah.
Right.
There's always one on the other.
Okay, are you,
That's it.
are you satisfied?